a storm brewing political tensions in Bangladesh. Bangladesh, a vibrant democracy in South Asia, has always been a land of complexities and contrasts. Born from the ashes of a bloody war of independence in 1971, the nation has grappled with poverty, natural disasters, and political instability. The scars of its tumultuous birth still linger, shaping its present and future. Yet, through it all, the people of Bangladesh have clung fiercely to their hard-won democratic ideals. Their resilience and determination have been the bedrock of the nation's spirit. However, beneath the surface of this vibrant democracy, a storm has been brewing, threatening to disrupt the fragile peace. For years, political tensions have simmered between the ruling Awami League, led by Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina, and the opposition Bangladesh Nationalist Party, or BNP. These tensions have often manifested in public displays of dissent and unrest. The rivalry between these two parties runs deep, often spilling over into violence and accusations of rigging and corruption. The political landscape has been marred by frequent clashes and a pervasive sense of mistrust. The Awami League, with its roots in the liberation struggle, has long been seen as a champion of secularism and progress. Its leadership has often emphasized development and modernization. The BNP, on the other hand, has often been accused of harboring Islamist sympathies and exploiting religious sentiments for political gain. This ideological divide has further deepened the rift between the two parties. As the years passed, the political climate in Bangladesh grew increasingly polarized. The divide between supporters of the two major parties became more pronounced, affecting everyday interactions and social cohesion. The Awami League, buoyed by its success in economic development and social programs, tightened its grip on power, often at the expense of democratic norms. Their achievements in infrastructure and social welfare have been significant, yet controversial. The BNP, marginalized and weakened, cried foul, alleging widespread corruption and suppression of dissent. Their calls for justice and transparency have resonated with many who feel disenfranchised. This toxic mix of political rivalry, mistrust, and escalating rhetoric created a tinderbox-like atmosphere in the country. The air was thick with tension, and the potential for conflict seemed ever present. By the turn of 2024, this volatile mix of political tensions, economic anxieties, and social divisions had reached a boiling point. The nation's stability was hanging by a thread. The stage was set for a dramatic confrontation that would shake the very foundations of Bangladesh's fragile democracy. The stakes were higher than ever, and the outcome uncertain. What followed would be a pivotal chapter in the nation's history, a year of turmoil and upheaval that would test the resilience of its people and leave an indelible mark on its political landscape. The events of this period would be remembered for generations to come. The controversial election, a catalyst for unrest. The year 2024 dawned with a sense of foreboding in Bangladesh as the nation braced itself for what was to come. The long-simmering political tensions came to a head with the general election scheduled for January, a month that would prove to be pivotal. The election was seen as a referendum on Sheikh Hasina's decade-long rule, a rule marked by both impressive economic growth and growing concerns about authoritarianism. Her leadership had brought significant development, but at what cost? The opposition, led by the BNP, sensed an opportunity to capitalize on the growing public unease, hoping to turn the tide in their favor. However, the BNP's hopes were dashed when the party announced a boycott of the election, citing fears of rigging and a lack of a level playing field. This decision would have far-reaching consequences. The boycott proved to be a fatal miscalculation, leaving the political landscape in disarray. It allowed the Awami League to sweep the polls, securing a landslide victory that was widely seen as hollow and lacking credibility. The absence of a strong opposition presence was palpable. The voter turnout was abysmally low, a clear indication of the public's disillusionment with the electoral process. Many felt their votes would not make a difference. International observers and human rights groups raised serious concerns about the fairness of the election, questioning the integrity of the process. Reports of irregularities, including voter intimidation, ballot stuffing, and manipulation of results, were widespread, casting a shadow over the entire election. The Awami League's victory, though resounding, was tainted by allegations of fraud and a lack of legitimacy. Celebrations were muted by the controversy. The opposition cried foul, accusing the government of stealing the election, while the international community expressed deep reservations about the state of democracy in Bangladesh. The global spotlight was now on the nation. The controversial election results deepened the political divide in Bangladesh, creating an atmosphere of tension and uncertainty. It fueled a sense of frustration and anger among the opposition and its supporters, who felt robbed of their democratic right to choose their leaders. The streets echoed with their discontent. The stage was set for a period of prolonged unrest and instability as the nation grappled with the fallout of a deeply flawed election. The clashes between protesters and police became a common sight. The January 2024 election was not merely a political event, it was a catalyst that ignited a powder keg of discontent, setting in motion a chain of events that would culminate in a dramatic showdown between the people and the government. The future of Bangladesh hung in the balance. From quotas to crisis, the June protests ignite. The political climate in Bangladesh remained highly charged in the aftermath of the disputed January election, which had left the nation divided and on edge. The opposition, smarting from its boycott strategy's failure, searched for an opportunity to challenge the Awami League's grip on power, hoping to capitalize on any sign of public discontent. That opportunity presented itself in June, sparked by an unlikely source: student protests against the civil service quota system, a policy that had long been a point of contention. The protests began at Dhaka University, the country's premier educational institution, known for its history of political activism and student movements. Students were up in arms against a government policy that reserved a significant percentage of government jobs for certain disadvantaged groups, leaving limited opportunities for students from general categories who felt marginalized and overlooked. While the quota system was intended to promote social justice, it had long been a source of resentment among many students who felt it was unfair and discriminatory, arguing that merit should be the primary criterion for job allocation. What started as a relatively contained campus protest quickly gained momentum, transforming into a much broader expression of discontent against the government, reflecting deeper societal frustrations. Students from other universities and colleges across the country joined the demonstrations, their chants of no more quota soon morphing into calls for greater accountability, transparency, and an end to what they perceived as the Awami League's increasingly authoritarian rule, which they felt stifled democratic freedoms. Social media platforms became vital tools for mobilizing support and disseminating information, amplifying the students' voices and galvanizing public opinion, making it impossible for the government to ignore the growing unrest. The Awami League, initially dismissive of the student protests, found itself facing a formidable challenge as the movement's momentum showed no signs of waning. The demonstrations, fueled by a potent mix of genuine grievances and simmering anti-government sentiment, resonated with a wider population grappling with rising living costs, unemployment, and a perceived erosion of democratic freedoms, creating a perfect storm of discontent. The student-led movement became a lightning rod for broader public discontent, uniting a diverse cross-section of Bangladeshi society under a common banner of dissent, highlighting the deep-seated issues that had been brewing beneath the surface for years. Section 4. A government under siege. The people's fury grows. As June bled into July, the student protests in Bangladesh showed no signs of abating. In fact, they morphed into a nationwide movement, attracting support from various segments of society. The government's initial dismissive attitude towards the demonstrations transformed into alarm as the protests grew larger, louder, and more defiant by the day. The demands of the protesters expanded beyond the initial grievances over the quota system to encompass a wider critique of the government's policies and Sheikh Hasina's leadership. The Awami League, accustomed to ruling with an iron fist, found itself facing an unprecedented challenge to its authority. The protests, fueled by a deep wellspring of discontent over economic inequality, perceived corruption and shrinking democratic space, posed a direct threat to the very foundation of the Awami League's rule. The government's control over the narrative began to slip as images of peaceful protesters being met with tear gas, water cannons, and brute force flooded social media and international news outlets. The situation grew increasingly precarious for the Awami League government as the protests, once confined to the capital city of Dhaka, spread like wildfire to other major cities and towns across the country. The government found itself grappling with a hydra-headed crisis, with demonstrations erupting in different parts of the country, each echoing the same message of discontent and demanding change. The Awami League, once seen as an indomitable force in Bangladeshi politics, found itself on the back foot, struggling to contain the rising tide of public anger.